Welcome to the Tim Booker Book Sharing channel. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our updates. Let's explore the world of books together.
Today I will interpret for you a book called Rethink. Rethink is not a new concept. In simple terms, it means learning to reflect, going back, and thinking again. Since childhood, we have known the importance of self-reflection 3 times a day. This practice helps us identify our shortcomings, break fixed thinking patterns, and constantly improve ourselves. It seems like common knowledge that everyone understands, so why would the author write a book about it? The author of this book is Adam Grant, a professor of organizational psychology at the Wharton School, who has been honored as the most popular lecturer at the school for 7 consecutive years. In addition to this, he has been recognized as one of the 10 most influential management thinkers globally. Simultaneously, he is an excellent writer with works like Originals, accumulating sales of over 2 million copies. Years of teaching and research experience led Adam Grant to the discovery that people may not be as good at rethinking as they think, and they lack the tools for it. For example, some people, to meet their parents' expectations, work in a job they don't like for over a decade, locking their life navigation system onto a single goal. They never stop to rethink what they truly like, what suits them, and what they want to gain from their work. In the end, they follow what seems to be the right direction but reach the wrong destination. Similarly, research has found that more determined climbers are more likely to die in an expedition because they are determined to reach the summit at any cost, forgetting that the best determination is to grit your teeth and choose to turn back. To some extent, we are all conservatives in terms of mindset, choosing to stick to old ideas rather than struggle with new ones. So, how can we break free from the shackles of thinking and rethink? This is the theme that this book explores. In this book, Grant cites numerous cases to show us how people are trapped in old viewpoints and how to rethink. In the following interpretation, I will add detailed psychological analysis to each mentioned case to help you better understand the concept of rethinking. In the first part, we start from our own perspective, exploring the factors that hinder us from rethinking through 3 typical cases, and finding ways to rethink along with the author. In the second part, we witness an outstanding debate to see how to pass on this power to others and encourage more people to rethink. Alright, let's officially enter the first part. Firstly, let's explore how, in a rapidly changing era, a successful entrepreneur lost multiple opportunities and eventually got left behind by not rethinking. Mike Lazaridis, the inventor, founder, and CEO of BlackBerry, was a visionary and creative individual dreaming of changing the wireless communication industry. In 1999, the BlackBerry smartphone was launched, featuring a computer-like full keyboard, exclusive email push service, and a secure system. These features led BlackBerry to dominate the global smartphone market for a long time. However, in just 5 years, by 2014, BlackBerry's market share plummeted to less than 1%. What happened in between? In 2007, Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone, eliminating the physical keyboard and introducing a full touch screen. Lazaridis didn't consider this a threat, stating, "Not everyone can type on glass." As the global market transitioned from 2G to 3G in 2008, the internet and mobile collided, and Apple and Android launched open app stores. Lazaridis, however, still believed people needed a phone for work emails and calls, not a phone filled with entertainment apps. In 2010, Lazaridis abandoned instant messaging services, missing out on the WhatsApp trend. To Lazaridis, BlackBerry was always a productivity tool for typing emails with a keyboard, catering to a few million devoted fans. Little did he know he was giving up a market of billions. Why was Lazaridis unwilling to rethink? According to author Adam Grant, BlackBerry symbolized Lazaridis' self-identity, and rethinking threatened his self-identity. Just like firefighters who, despite having the option to drop their equipment for a better chance of survival, rarely think of doing so. Similarly, Lazaridis faced an identity crisis. If BlackBerry was no longer a productivity tool for emails, what was it? If BlackBerry changed, who was Mike Lazaridis, the creator of it all? In essence, when facing rapid environmental changes, the key to rethinking is separation. Separate your past self from your present self, separate your views from your identity. What does this mean? Firstly, separating your past self from your present self means daring to make mistakes and embracing the unknown. Many fear making mistakes, preferring no results over potential issues. However, reconsidering the impact of making mistakes reveals that it is an opportunity for growth. Embrace these moments as they provide a chance to correct existing beliefs, signaling continuous self-iteration and improvement. Secondly, separate your views from your identity, defining your identity by values rather than opinions. Grant suggests that self-identity is best aligned with values. Let your values define who you are: curious, fair-minded, for example. Values don't change easily, so new opinions, like rethinking the functionality of a phone, won't threaten your self-identity if they align with your values. Don't tie yourself to unreliable opinions, instead, associate yourself with stable values to facilitate rethinking. If the previous case was a negative example of rethinking, the next case is a classic textbook example of rethinking. Without further ado, let's explore how a presidential candidate with little hope of winning utilized their imposter syndrome as an advantage, ultimately defeating competitors. In psychology, there's a term called imposter syndrome, which refers to a tendency of self-doubt and self-deprecation, where someone, despite achieving many successes, feels like an imposter and undeserving of those accomplishments. Hala Thomasdottir is one such woman with imposter syndrome. A successful entrepreneur and one of the candidates for the Icelandic presidency, Hala unexpectedly received a call on December 1, 2015, asking her to run for president. Instead of excitement, her initial reaction was self-doubt: how could she be a president? From an outsider's perspective, Hala was more than qualified for the presidential race. Although lacking political experience, she was an outstanding leader who helped establish a university and co-founded an investment company in 2007. When the global financial crisis hit in 2008, Iceland faced one of the worst economic crises in history. However, Hala successfully led her company through the tough times with excellent leadership and decision-making skills. Even with her qualifications, Hala hesitated for a long time. Finally, encouraged by friends and family, she decided to run for president. Competing against over 20 candidates as a relatively unknown figure, Hala's campaign faced significant challenges. One formidable competitor was Davud's son, a polar opposite to Hala. While Hala was overly modest, Dav exuded excessive confidence, believing he had the experience and knowledge to be president. In reality, Dav was recognized by Time magazine as one of the culprits of the global financial crisis, with Parliament even passing an unconventional law requiring top officials to have at least a master's degree in economics. Examining the election results, although Hala didn't get a single cover interview and didn't have a huge election budget, on election day, she won over 25% of the votes, ranking second. While Hala didn't become president, she thoroughly defeated the overconfident Dav, who ranked fourth, receiving less than 14% of the votes. This was a remarkable achievement, and Hala gained fame. Grant once invited Hala to his class for a sharing session. Reflecting on her victory, Hala attributed her motivation to the imposter syndrome. Throughout the campaign, her self-doubt led to a deeper understanding of herself. Previously, Hala thought self-doubt weakened her, but now she interprets doubt differently. She sees doubt not as questioning her abilities but as a sign to improve tools and methods. While being confident in her learning abilities, she questions her current solutions to problems, achieving a state of confident humility. We don't have to be individuals with imposter syndrome, constantly self-doubting, but we can find key elements to help us rethink, being confident in certain areas while remaining skeptical of our current methods, as Hala did. The first two cases discussed the impact of individual rethinking. What happens when it's a group of people? Will the effect be more significant? Let's explore the last case, how a team filled with conflict and struggle used the power of rethinking to create an Oscar-winning animation. In 1995, Pixar released its first feature-length animated film, Toy Story, becoming the domestic box office champion with a revenue of $360 million. However, the company's founder sought change and invited director Brad Bird in 2000 to drive the transformation. Soon, Bird proposed an ambitious idea, creating a superhero movie with realistic rendering of explosions and human hair using new generation animation technology. When he presented this vision, Pixar's technical team thought it would take 10 years and $500 million, making it seem unrealistic. Nevertheless, Bird wasn't ready to give up. He formed a challenger team, leading these individuals, not ordinary animation masters but those perceived as unconventional, people with better ways of doing things but frustrated due to their inability to showcase their capabilities. These individuals were characterized by their willingness to express themselves, question, and be a bit critical, debating details like how far a character's hairline should recede. Their goal, however, was unified, achieving excellence in their work. They brainstormed, found affordable alternatives to expensive technology, and sought alternative solutions to tricky problems. Eventually, Pixar's most complex film, The Incredibles, was created in 4 years, costing less than $100 million but grossing over $600 million at the box office and winning the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. Looking back, it seems like Brad Bird didn't do anything extraordinary. He simply brought together a group of disagreeable people, those with critical, skeptical, and challenging qualities. Typically, we want harmony among team members, avoiding conflicts as much as possible. However, Bird took a different approach, striving to establish an interpersonal network full of challenges. While it might seem unfavorable to team development, it actually produced excellent results. Why? Because no conflict doesn't necessarily mean harmony, sometimes, it signifies indifference. Imagine if every member complies, and when asked for opinions, everyone says, "It's fine, no issues." Is that really a good thing? Grant suggests that silence or lack of expression of opinions is actually a disregard for the value of each person's views, a lack of respect for the ability to present different opinions. A team with only one voice is not conducive to rethinking. Conversely, arguing with someone, questioning opinions is not disrespectful, it's a sign of respect. It indicates valuing the other person's opinions because if they were unimportant, there would be no need to bother refuting them. One important point to note is that Grant isn't saying that conflict is always good or that having conflict always benefits rethinking. The key is the type of conflict. Australian organizational psychologist Karen J. Jen introduces 2 types of conflict: relationship conflict and task conflict. Relationship conflict involves friction and hostility with personal emotions, a person-focused conflict. On the other hand, task conflict is about conflicts arising from ideas and viewpoints, an issue-focused conflict. Bird's team, although filled with disagreeable individuals, often accompanied by friction and disputes, had task conflict rather than relationship conflict. They would readily present various opinions but wouldn't attack the person. Once certain opinion conflicts were resolved, they would adjust to the same direction and continue working until encountering new problems to discuss. However, managing disagreeable individuals is not an easy task, and a slight oversight can transform task conflict into relationship conflict. How can the possibility of transformation between the two be prevented? In Bird's case, we can see a glimpse: only when people feel accepted, supported, and trusted, will conflict spark creativity and the ability to rethink. This part is quite extensive. Let's summarize. How can we break free from the constraints of thinking and achieve rethinking? Firstly, don't abandon rethinking to maintain self-identity. Try to separate from your past self and your views, cultivating the habit of rethinking. Secondly, when there's a tendency towards self-doubt, view it as an opportunity for growth. Be confident in your learning abilities while questioning your current solutions, achieving confident humility. Lastly, don't fear conflict, accept challenges from critics. Although relationship conflict is uncomfortable, task conflict often helps you rethink. Alright, after discussing how we achieve rethinking ourselves, let's now explore how to encourage more people to rethink. This is particularly crucial as it closely relates to our lives. For instance, when we want leaders to accept our proposals, persuade parents not to randomly buy health supplements, or caution children against excessive computer use, it often feels like a struggle to convince others. In such situations, finding ways to make others rethink becomes essential. One effective method to make others reconsider and accept your viewpoint is through debates. So, let's delve into the art of debates by examining a remarkable debate that took place in February 2019 in San Francisco, where a top British debater, Harish, faced off against an AI debater developed by IBM named Debatra. The debate topic was, should preschool education be subsidized by the government? Debatra argued in favor of subsidizing preschool education, while Harish argued against it. Before the debate began, the audience overwhelmingly supported Debatra's position, with a whopping 79% in favor. However, after the debate concluded, Debatra's support dropped to 62%, while Harish's support increased from 13% to 30%, securing his victory. Harish successfully persuaded some of the audience to reconsider their stance. How did he achieve this, and what can we learn from the art of debate? Let's dive into the details. Debatra was no stranger to debating with humans, boasting impressive records. Her knowledge base consisted of 400 million articles, mostly from authoritative newspapers and magazines. Equipped with a viewpoint detection engine, she could locate key arguments, define the scope of the issue, and weigh evidence. Debatra, representing the affirmative side, presented a plethora of data, highlighting the benefits of preschool education in the United States from academic, social, and professional perspectives. Faced with Debatra's compelling arguments, Harish didn't rush to express his own views or counterarguments. Instead, he reiterated their common ground on the issue of poverty and affirmed the validity of the research Debatra had cited. He said, "I think our differences aren't as significant as they appear." Harish's approach is insightful, and let's pause here to discuss it more thoroughly. When attempting to persuade others, many people tend to directly present their viewpoints. For example, if you want to convince a friend to smoke less, you might say, "Smoking is bad for your health, look at who has ruined their lungs by smoking." While this may seem reasonable, the other person may not necessarily agree, feeling that you don't understand why they smoke. To make others rethink, we must rethink ourselves. In other words, we need to learn to actively listen and empathize. This doesn't mean agreeing with the other person's viewpoint but attempting to understand their feelings and thoughts. This approach helps bring both sides to a common ground for discussion, fostering a more open exchange. By acknowledging shared perspectives and recognizing what we've learned from others, we not only demonstrate our openness but also lower the other person's defenses, prompting them to explore their views more deeply, achieving the goal of rethinking. Moving forward, Harish's next advantage came from his disadvantage, his inability to grasp vast amounts of information like the AI debater Debatra. Faced with Debatra's extensive reasons, Harish presented only 2 rebuttal points. He argued that subsidizing preschool education wouldn't solve the harm caused by poverty. First, government funds are limited, and there are many projects in need of assistance, making preschool education not necessarily the highest priority. Second, even with subsidies, preschool education wouldn't be entirely free, and poor children still wouldn't afford quality preschool classes. In this case, how did Harish play his cards right? When negotiating with others, some might feel that the more reasons presented, the more likely the scale will tip in their favor. However, the author tells us the opposite is true. True negotiation experts often provide fewer reasons. In an experiment conducted by the author and colleagues to encourage alumni who had never donated to the school to contribute, they tested 2 different persuasive reasons. One reason emphasized that the funds would benefit the students, teachers, and staff of the school. The other reason highlighted that donating was an opportunity for the donors to feel good. The results showed that when only one reason was given, 6.5% of alumni eventually made a donation. However, when both reasons were presented together, the donation rate dropped to below 3%. The impact of one reason was more than double the combined impact of both reasons. Why does this happen? The author explains that a single argument is like a conversation, while multiple arguments can form an attack, evoking resistance. This situation is common in life. For example, in a couple's disagreement, if one starts bringing up old issues, listing evidence and reasons against the other, the disagreement quickly escalates into an argument, with no one willing to back down. Excessive reasons not only make people feel attacked and hinder their ability to rethink but also make it easier for them to find loopholes. Harish said, if there are too many points, you dilute the power of each point. Too many points aren't easy to explain. I don't think the audience would believe that they are all equally important. Moreover, the more important the topic is to people, the more critical the quality of reasons becomes. Once the other person denies one of our reasons, they can easily overturn our entire viewpoint. This further reinforces their existing beliefs and hinders the process of rethinking. In reality, we rarely succeed in convincing others to change their minds. Psychologists have long discovered that the most likely person to persuade someone to change their mind is the individual themselves. How can this be achieved? The answer is through questioning, encouraging them to think for themselves. In the debate, Harish didn't just counter or attack with declarative statements, he used many questions. He first stated his viewpoint, that preschool education is good, but that doesn't necessarily mean it should be subsidized by the US government. Then, he raised questions like, why is it this way? Followed by questioning whether preschool education is insufficient, whether it truly helps the most vulnerable groups, why it is so expensive, and who the real beneficiaries are. By asking questions to the audience, he prompted them to think independently. Asking questions doesn't necessarily aim to convince them, but rather to open them up, making them acknowledge that they might be wrong and initiating the cycle of rethinking. As the author summarizes, debate is not a tug-of-war where pulling the rope harder brings the opponent to your side. Debate is more like an unscripted dance where you need to coordinate with a partner with a different rhythm. If you're too forceful, your partner will resist. If you adjust your steps to match their movements and encourage them to do the same, you are more likely to be in sync. Alright, this concludes the introduction to rethinking. Let's briefly summarize. In the first part, we used 3 cases to explore what hinders us from rethinking and how to gain the power to rethink. Firstly, in the case of Mike Lazaridis, the founder of BlackBerry, we learned that to maintain self-identity, people sometimes give up on rethinking. The key to change in such situations is separation. Separating your present self from your past self, embracing the unknown, and daring to make mistakes can free you from mental constraints and shed the baggage of the past. It involves disconnecting your viewpoints from your identity, defining identity with your values rather than your opinions, and using a stable self to confront an era of rapid change. Secondly, in the case of Iceland's former presidential candidate Halla Thomasdottir, we understood that excessive confidence doesn't always lead to better rethinking. Sometimes, the imposter syndrome or self-doubt can be a source of motivation for rethinking. Finding a balance, not overly confident or overly humble but confidently humble, involves having confidence in your abilities while recognizing that the tools you possess may not always suffice, and continuous improvement is necessary. Lastly, in the case of Pixar director Brad Bird, we learned that being disagreeable and critical is not a drawback, it's a catalyst for rethinking. Compliance and silence are the real obstacles to rethinking. Lack of conflict doesn't necessarily mean harmony, sometimes, it signifies indifference. However, it's crucial to manage the intensity of conflicts, preventing task conflicts from escalating into relationship conflicts. In the second part, using a captivating man versus machine debate, we explained how to encourage more people to rethink. When persuading others to accept our viewpoints, first, don't rush, listen to the other person's thoughts, seek common ground, and let the other person drop their defenses to rekindle the desire for exploration. Second, don't be greedy, maintain the quality of each reason, don't dilute the strength of each viewpoint, and only through avoiding resistance can entrenched beliefs be loosened. Third, don't be singular. Avoid stating opinions for the other person and instead ask questions, allowing them to think independently and ultimately gain the power to rethink. In reality, rethinking is not complex, and it isn't a burden. It's like an annual health checkup to examine whether there have been changes in our physical condition. We can also conduct such evaluations for other crucial aspects of life, such as personal goals, work status, and thinking patterns. This process can be applied to broader domains like teams, businesses, and schools. Rethinking may not necessarily lead to an immediate change in ideas or visible results, it simply encourages reflection on the current state, breaking away from rigid thinking, and embracing change. As Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa once said, the greatest difference between person to person lies in whether you have truly lived for over 10,000 days or merely lived one day but repeated it over 10,000 times. I believe this is the greatest value that rethinking brings us, allowing us to live more awakened, understanding when to advance, when to retreat, when to abandon our previous positions, and when to embrace a new self. Alright, that covers all the content for today. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with your friends. Let's combine wisdom and practice, achieve our financial goals, and create a better future together. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.